For a fleeting second, you may have heard that there was a financial collapse and a subsequent uprising in the small island nation of Sri Lanka. But do you know what really happened?
So, join me, Desh, a storyteller and a member of the Sri Lankan diaspora, in my quest to find answers to the question, what the hell happened to Sri Lanka? Sri Lanka's crisis, as we see it today, is enormously complex. In our last episode, we looked at how the Rajapaksas returned to Sri Lanka's political arena. In the grand scheme of things, this was hailed as something promising for most Sri Lankans. The level of support Gotabaya Rajapaksa received was immense. Most popular musicians of the country passionately backed Gotabaya Rajapaksa. But what followed after was a dismal picture. Soon, Sri Lanka faced a catastrophe, far worse than anything it was prepared for. Sri Lanka, like most of the world, was greatly impacted by the global pandemic. Its first case arrived on the 27th of January 2020. What followed was an outcry, a quick recovery, and then a celebration. The former health minister was seen affectionately embracing a woman, Sri Lanka's first COVID patient from China. In March 2020, however, things took a turn with the island's cases spiking. Sri Lanka's police and military imposed curfews all across the island in an attempt to control the virus. In a desperate case to turn things around, Sri Lanka's government forced mandatory cremations on every death that was of unnatural causes. By February 2021, after claims of human rights violations and international outcry, the government finally allowed its minorities to bury their dead. By August 2021, the government refused to lay another lockdown despite reaching 1,000 deaths in 8 days. The central bank artificially raised its interest rates in an attempt to curb the economic loss, a fact later cited as a contributing factor to Sri Lanka's economic crisis. The COVID-19 pandemic was one of the first triggers to what we witnessed at the Aragalaya a year later. The word Aragalaya is an ancient word in Sinhala. I asked Sandun Thudugala, a member of the Law and Society group, what led to the crisis? How did the Aragalaya come into place? And how would one define the word Aragalaya?
Actually, there's no exact word for Aragalaya. I think struggle is okay, but normally we use Aragalaya when we use English also, because Aragalaya is a bit more than struggle. So it is a bit more than that. As you know, so after COVID and everything, so by the first, let's say towards the end of last year and at the beginning of this year, we as a country have started to see the this massive economic crisis that we are going to face. No, so I think the sad part of it, we all knew that's coming. I think government, state, and everyone knew that this is coming, and a lot of international financial institutions and everyone has been warning about us about the unsustainability of our foreign debts and our flaws in our economic management policies and everything. But the government, especially the Rajapaksa, the Gotabaya Rajapaksa government, it was in a way arrogant in a way, and so stubborn that were always refusing what the warning signals that's been given, and they had their own path and they think we can manage it. And by early this year, we started seeing the negative impacts, the queues has started, and first I think we ran away with milk. I think milk powder was the first that started shortages, and then generally cooking gas and petroleum and everything. So nothing has happened in for the first couple of months, even January, February, there wasn't much. And then we saw smaller initiatives coming up. For example, one of the first things came up in Kohuwala, in Nugegoda Junction, few young people started a candle vigil. I think first day it was 4 or 5 young people. And the next day, there were a few others. And so they have continued it for weeks. And then we have, I think the initial mobilization then started through social media. And then there was, I don't know where it came from. Suddenly there was a announcement for everyone to come to Colombo on 3rd of April, if I'm not wrong. 3rd of April, there was kind of a general announcement. So people will start saying, so we had enough of this smaller struggle. So we should have like a big one. Everyone should come to Colombo on 3rd of April. And then government started get worried. And then they declare curfew on 3rd of April. And then they declared emergency regulation. So that kind of increased the anger among the people. Then after they removed the curfew on 4th of April. And then we have seen massive gatherings of people in various cities. I think people were ready to take that risk. And on 9th of April, they all came to Golface. So it was like around, I think the government says it's 50,000, but like I was there and my calculation was about 100 to 200,000 people throughout the day. In my life, that was like the most beautiful thing has happened in this country. Like people from various walks of the country, from rich to the poor, children, women, men, like clergies, monks, and everyone came to Golface and everyone had a message.
Social media played an important role in culmination of the Aragalaya. Much of its mobilization happened online through Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and other groups online. I had the opportunity to talk to Anuruddha Bandara, an important face in the Aragalaya movement. Bandara managed the Gotagogama social media pages. These pages were incredibly popular and followed by hundreds of thousands of people. Anuruddha was arrested and later disappeared for a brief period, sending alarms ringing through Sri Lanka's activist circles. I talked to Anuruddha to understand the work behind mobilizing and being an activist. I asked him about hashtag Gotagogama pages.
Yeah, about the social media page, that's true. But the whole campaign it was already forming. So there were certain hashtags. Some political parties, they used the hashtag Pannamu, or sometimes some parties they used some parties and the people they used to go home Gota, and there was another slogan, go home Gota 22. And also, if you consider the Kohola protest, they came up with power to the people or give us our power back. So those sort of slogans were there. So I came, I was promoting the slogan, the hashtag Go Home Gota 2022. So for that, we made, we came across a proper campaign. We had Facebook pages and also Facebook groups. And also a network of Instagram network in case of the government tries to take the page or the group down. So we had that as a backup. So with the Facebook groups and also the hashtags, what we wanted to do is make a network of them, try to network them. So that's why we built the group. But we came up with the common name. We tried to make a common name for it. So we came up with the hashtag thing. We grabbed the Go Home Gota 22 hashtag, and when we went ahead with that. So when the Mirihan incident came in, and also that group was really getting popular. So per day we had around 10,000 people joining. So quickly we started it with 0 members, and within 15 days we reached 100,000 members. So then again, for the same purpose, we made this Telegram network. So within first few hours, we could join 10,000, 20,000 people per group. We had 24 groups for 24 districts. So, and actually the groups in the northeast and those provinces, they were not that much active as we didn't have that much of contacts. But the groups of central province and western province, they were really active. So I think that how the government traced us back to us, they wanted to know what's going on, and they wanted to maybe control it. So that's how we got the attention there. We got onto road on 4th of February. We had a small protest in front of the same Golface site. We went on bikes to distribute stickers, asking people to voice up against the political corruptions. Actually, we named them as political terrorists because they are the ones who destroyed our economy. And when the Mirihan incident came up in the same night, there was some force from, like we do know like what the profiles which were sponsored or like the profiles which run the state propaganda, right? So they have these sort of certain profiles. So with some of them, they had published our images saying that we are the people who are trying to like make violence, or like we are the ones who are trying to get the people into the streets. And so such posts were circulating through these state sponsored profiles.
In March 2022, protest in Mirihana erupted outside the president's house, demanding his resignation. The protest only spread further when Sri Lanka's military and police got involved. Vehicles were set on fire with Colombo's main highways blocked and an island-wide curfew imposed. Several protesters and journalists were assaulted on live television. These incidents were later described as catalysts for the larger movement.
At around 11:40 p.m., the police came in and they just when I got into the living area, my father had already opened the door for them, and he was in a discussion. The police came in and asked for our identities and also the passports. Once he got my identity, he just stopped checking the others and stick with that. And so my point was like, we shouldn't be afraid of what we do. So what I said to the police at the same moment was like, there's nothing for me to hide. So the same content which I have inside my device, I have already posted in the Facebook. So, and also before coming to me, like I was in Kandy, so it's like 120 kilometers from Colombo. My other friends were in Colombo. If we are doing the right thing, we shouldn't be afraid. Like we hadn't done anything illegal. So that was my point. And even the police asked, like, if you knew if we were coming, and I said yes. So, and after checking my devices, they took me, saying that they need to take a statement. And also they informed my father to come into the Modra police, which is like in Colombo, at around 9 a.m. So then in the morning, I was taken into CID and kept in the outside in the vehicle, while the officer who arrested me had some meetings with their high officials. So in the same time, my father had came into the police and asked for me, but the Modra police station, they had said that they don't know what happened and they don't know about such an incident. So that's when the scene went viral, saying that I am missing. In the beginning, what we wanted is to empower the people to raise up their concerns. Like at that moment, the government was like, acting foolish, but no one came like out and no one was like talking about that. Even on the night like of 8th, we didn't think such a huge crowd would turn up. Like we just expected it to be around 50,000 maybe. But there were times like after the incident which took place on May, the government mobs spreading violence on these gold face protesters. I was there at the moment. So after that, like we didn't have much of a presence at the gold face. Like even at some points, even we thought that this is going to die, but we just held up. Like we just refused to go home without a win. So we just stayed.
On the 9th of April, large demonstrations gathered in the Gold Face Green, a popular beach location in Colombo, Sri Lanka. Tens of thousands of people attend the protest, making it a sight never seen before in Sri Lanka. The protesters' rallying cry, "Gota go home," was successfully pacified with the Rajapaksas' resignation. However, if you peel back carefully, those who are responsible for the crisis are now back in power with no real accountability. Since the Aragalaya, Sri Lanka has a new government. So I asked Ambika Satkunanathan, the former Human Rights Commissioner of Sri Lanka, and Eranga Ginige, the former advisor to President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, to ask what changes they see lie ahead.
When people say it's a new government, I would say it's not a new government. It is the same government because many of the people are still in power. And of course, the Rajapaksas are still behind the scenes, I suppose. They are the puppet masters to a large degree. Ranil Wickremesinghe, who is the current president, was elected by the Sri Lanka for the Jana Peramuna, which is the party of the Rajapaksas. The current prime minister is once again part of a close ally and part of the SLPP. Therefore, it is definitely the new government. I mean, not a new government, it's the same government. And I think the mistake, or maybe it is a lack of awareness, we can say, of the protesters, that they focused on an individual.
The president, Desh, had only one objective throughout this. It is to prevent another 88, 89. He and I have had lengthy conversations about it. He often recalls 88, 89 when he was positioned as an officer in the army during that time, and he was based in Matale. And he tells me how it all started. This is how it all started. There are protests from here and there, and they started attacking the police, and then the police starts to retaliate, and then it escalates, and then the military is brought in, and then some military personnel are killed, and then that starts a chain reaction. It goes back and forth until he says, in his own words, nobody knows who's killing who. So Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa's one thing was to prevent something like that from happening, because he promised safety, he promised security to his people, so that I'm not going to let that happen, which is why he was sort of being compassionate towards the youth in Aragali. I mean, he himself gave a specific location for the protests. It was a strategic decision that was taken early on, because we knew that something like this was going to happen. Instead of this happening all over the country, which will be extremely difficult to manage, sort of having it at one place would be a lot more manageable. So he was being compassionate for that. But then the infamous May 9th incident happens, where a group of Mahinda Rajapaksa loyalists comes to Aralega Mandira, the Prime Minister's residence, and then starts marching towards the President's house. Right now, this is something you might not know. I mean, that group's intention was to go and sort of blame and shout at the President, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, for asking Mahinda Rajapaksa to step down, because in their opinion and in their mind, they thought that it was the president who is asking Mahinda Rajapaksa to step down. But the story is not that simple. It was a collective decision that was taken by the Rajapaksas even before the Mirihan incident, where the protesters first came and attacked Gotabaya Rajapaksa's private residence. Right. Even before that, all the Rajapaksas collectively made a decision to step down from their respective portfolios, and they even submitted their resignation letters. Then, while others did, some of the senior party officials came and requested Mr. Mahinda Rajapaksa not to step down, to remain as the Prime Minister, that they will step down and let the opposition to come and form a government.
Of course, the individual bears much of the responsibility, but it is also the system, it is also the culture, it is also the family. So they did not focus on that. So technically, we could say what they demanded they received, but it really did not solve any of our problems or much of our problems. And the protesters were not aware of it. What is next? It seems clearly no one wants to go for elections.
As I say, that we have not moved even an inch from 1983. We have not learned any lessons from the darkest times that we have passed. There's absolutely no tolerance. There's absolutely no rationality. There's absolutely no understanding, mutual respect, equality in diversity. All those values that we sort of try to espouse and we try to sort of live by, we showed the world that we just don't have that.
What we have seen is also oppression. We have seen crackdown on protests. We have seen the Prevention of Terrorism Act being used against two people who are at the lead of the protest, that is Vasantha Mudalige, the president of the Sri Lanka, the Inter-University Students' Federation, and Siridhamma Himi, who was also at the forefront of the protest. So we can see that the crackdown on dissent is definitely happening. So where human rights are concerned, clearly there isn't a lot of improvement. What we are seeing economically, of course, we have seen, food inflation nearly, I think it's at last I checked, was like 90%. During Aragalaya, people demanded, they called it system change. They wanted system change. But I don't think people really understand what system change is. They seem to think, and this is historical too, that changing people, enacting new laws or establishing new institutions brings about change. It does not. Having been part of a state institution for 5 years and trying to reform it and largely failing, I can speak from personal experience that it does not. Because there is also the culture, the political culture, the social culture, the institutional culture. While you have these laws, there are also informal practices and processes that have become so ingrained and sometimes take precedence over the formal, the official, the legal. So you need to acknowledge all that and do the hard work in raising the awareness, in changing conversations, changing mindsets, mobilizing people. But many do not want to do that because that is long-term, it's resource, time, energy intensive, it is difficult, you will be faced with hostility. It is far easier to enact a law or to set up an institution and say, okay, we've got a women's commission now, women's rights protected, tick the box. Really not going to help. Having another commission is really not going to help women's rights because you know what? Patriarchy is ingrained, and setting up a separate institution is not going to help tackle because the processes and systems themselves tend to be patriarchal and sexist in the state structure. So therefore, that is just one example. Therefore, I think when we say system change, it is important to undertake an analysis that takes all these, socio-political, economic, psychological aspects into account and not look at it as a technical, positivist, legal way of solving the problem because really there's only so much you can do with that.
But Vraie Cally Balthazaar, a new up-and-coming face in Sri Lankan politics, and Sarala Emmanuel, the researcher from Batticaloa we spoke in an earlier episode, are optimistic and believe true power is still vested in the people.
So I think the premise that the Aragalaya got what it set out to, what it asked for, that very premise is kind of incorrect. I know there was a slogan saying "Go to go home," but that was an indication in some sense, or at least it was symbolic of. I mean, yes, it was Gota go home, Mahinda go home, but that was symbolic of a structure and not just a person. So Ranil Rajapaksha is only an extension of the Rajapaksha family. So in no way has the Aragalaya really ended. And this is something that we say quite often. I said just today also, the Aragalaya, the struggle hasn't changed. If we still can't manage to feed our children, if we're still struggling for absolute basics, if we still have no access to education the way in which our children should have access, right? This is a struggle. If the government continues to prioritize defense, to prioritize infrastructure over healthcare, over education, over transport, over these very basic things that regular citizens need to live on a day-to-day basis, the struggle hasn't ended. I think the Aragalaya in general across the island, the Aragalaya was this amazing awakening of people's consciousness. It was an awakening of the youth of this country. Also, a lot of women there, they started getting involved in politics in a way in which we hadn't seen before. And I think it changed the paradigm. There was a shift in how people understood politics, that politicians weren't the only ones who were able to talk about politics, that our lives are inherently political. And I think this is the awakening. This is the consciousness that our lives are political. that feeding our children is political, that our child's school, Montessori or nursery or primary school or university education is political. Whatever food we have on our plate is political. And I think this understanding that these things are so political is what's changed.
I think some forms have worked in some places or have failed in some places, and there's been so much creativity in the forms of resistance, and that is also something that's going to live on. So there's already like so much rich resources of resistance that's there, which can't be taken away, right? So those are ways in which we will have to sustain movements. When I say different forms, like for me personally, we need to also evolve. We need to also change. Like we are against a very, very, very powerful state, militarized state with legal like weapons that they're using. Like you said, there's so many arrests. The same Prevention of Terrorism Act, which was used in the 70s, 80s, 90s, is still being used. So we also need to think of other ways of continuing the struggle without always going head on with this kind of, machine and then getting crushed. But that requires lots of conversations among different movements, different struggles in different parts of the country, which we haven't done enough. And I think that's something we need to slow down and start doing to imagine what we want, right? We know what we don't want, but we need to imagine and have conversations about what we want because we are not on the same page on that. So that's a lot of work we need to do. Whatever happens in parliament, whoever the power Gota comes back or not, like that may be the case.
Even when people came in on the 9th of April, and I remember this distinctly, my first day at the Aragale was on the 10th of April. And there was like, when people talked about it, they said, okay, so this is Golfes Aragale. I'm saying, the epicenter of all of this. And people are like, oh, it'll die down in 2 weeks, in 4 weeks, in 6 weeks. And I think people never fully, also nobody in power truly gauged how powerful this is going to be. They totally underestimated the power of the people. And I think Ranil right now is also underestimating the power of the people. He knows how powerful it is, which is why he keeps shutting down the voice of dissent. But I don't think he fully understands either that the same voice, the same process that brought him into power will take him out.
You and I, in our lifetime, have not ever seen this kind of mass mobilization, passion for social change, right? And I look at the young people who were there. I look at the young people who are part of our little protest, right? They're 16 years old, 10 years old, university students, and I think you can't take that away from them, right? So already there's no going back, You have been a part of this movement. You have dared to dream. Whether that dream is going to come true or not in our lifetime is not the point. The point is that, you came together to imagine something different. And that change has already happened.
Sri Lanka's mass protest, the Aragale, which made news worldwide, marked the beginning of what looked like a collective awakening. But for a country that has known nothing but turmoil and violence, there is much work to be done. We've got some new leaders in the parliament today, post-protest, post-upheaval. We also have the same old leaders in the parliament. Will anything be any different? Just before we wrapped up this series, Sri Lanka signed a deal with the IMF to restructure its debts. So there is some hope. While Sri Lanka draws close to another election and people return to polls, the question remains, what will happen next? Even though Sri Lanka has been through so much turmoil and violence, the country is full of incredibly resilient people, especially after speaking to so many of current leaders, advisors, and future leaders. I do feel a sense of hope that maybe the remnants of the Aragale is a new generation of political leaders. Thank you for everyone who listened to this podcast. Thank you for all the guests who have helped us tell this story about a rich, diverse island and its quest for stability. I hope we answered the question, what the hell happened to Sri Lanka?